Welcome. Thank you very much for that really kind introduction, Sammy. So just to let you know, I have relatively short dark blonde hair. I'm wearing glasses. I've got a black top on today with a pink cardie. That is mainly for the benefit of people who might be online who may not have camera access, but also might have visual disabilities as well. So I'm delighted to be with you today. It's been great to come down from Nottingham and meet you all and spend a good amount of last night chatting away. So that was fantastic. So today I'm going to be talking about developing a diverse culture. And just as a few slides, you know, why are we still talking about this in 2022? It feels a bit bonkers, really. You would like to think that we wouldn't need to be talking about this in 2022. But this was something that I spotted on LinkedIn a few months ago. Is everyone staggered by the diversity on that photograph? I mean, that is pretty impressive, isn't it, as things go? And these are the people who are in charge of security, you know, who are, you know, taking an incredibly, you know, important role, but they are really not representing the people who they are trying to keep secure at all. So there's still much to be done. This is a photo which is a little bit old now. It is well over 2.5 years old. But you know, on the face of it, it's like, what's the problem with this photo? It looks okay, doesn't it? I mean, you know, it's young people. Obviously, you know, we're all aware of Greta and everything that she's been trying to do in terms of climate change. However, that was the original photo. No. Yeah, pretty awful. Literally, the black voice was taken out of the conversation. Now, you could argue the photographer was thinking that that was a better portrait, that was more aesthetically pleasing. However, that was the actual photo. And in terms of taking the black voice out of the debate and feeling that that is acceptable, is the point that I'm making, really. You know, I thought that was pretty awful. So I think, you know, there's some examples, some recent and, you know, over the past couple of years, some examples about, you know, how this is still something that we really need to think about and take an active approach. As something a little bit more recent, 2 weeks ago, I was with EPSRC and I was at the launch of their new strategy, their 5-year strategy, which they launched in March. And I guess one of the points that I want to make is that this really can't be ignored. Even if you want to do, even if you're not entirely convinced about the equality and diversity agenda, you really need to, as early career researchers, you really need to be starting to take note. This is absolutely central to what EPSRC, who only has £8 billion. I mean, it's only 8 billion, you know, I mean, it's not a lot of money. But, you know, and the way that they're going to be distributing that money over the next 5 years, people, you know, will seriously need to start considering ED&I in the way that they're doing it. Now, I realised when I was literally at the conference when I took these slides a couple of weeks ago, and they haven't actually given me the slide set yet. But the bottom slide, their principles for change, is all about diversity of people, skills and experience, which will lead to better research, which is absolutely, you know, if you need a business case for equality and diversity and inclusion, I would say, you know, well, passionately, I believe it's the right thing to do, but fundamentally, it will lead to better science, and surely that's what we're all in the room to do. Without that, we are never going to get the full story and also get the full picture of the science. So just really as a heads up, as and when you're applying for those brilliant funding, and we had some great conversations last night about, you know, some funding opportunities, you know, that are there and ready to be grabbed, please have a really good think about how your inclusive approach can be encapsulated in what you're doing. So what exactly is it that I'm really talking about? This is a good slide because I think some people think that the equality bit of ED&I is actually a little bit controversial. And that's tried to encapsulate in the first little cartoon there, because everyone is getting the equal treatment. Everyone's been given a box to stand on in order to see, you know, the game of football. However, so everyone's been treated equally, and that's a good thing, isn't it? You know, that's the right thing. However, that means that someone still can't see the game. So they've all been treated equally, that's a good thing. However, that means that people aren't actually getting access to the same thing. So actually what we need to be talking about is equity rather than perhaps equality. And so perhaps, you know, if you've looked into this wonderful world, a lot of people have dropped the E of the ED&I because they're more thinking about diversity and inclusion, because there is this debate around equality. Should we be treating everyone equal, or should we be thinking about things like reasonable adjustments? Should we actually be tailoring our approach according to what people need? And I guess that's what the equity slide is about. You know, therefore, that person has been given the 2 boxes to stand on, which is brilliant. They can now see the game. However, I guess what we're really thinking about is justice, and where we should be saying what we need to do is actually remove all the barriers in the first place. So therefore, by changing the fence, being able to have a fence that everyone can look through, you don't need to be thinking about boxes anymore. You don't need to be making those reasonable adjustments. People can just get on and do the brilliant stuff that they can do, because actually the systematic barriers have actually been removed. So I just think that that's kind of like a useful little illustration of, you know, of what equality, diversity and inclusion could mean. Just as a bit of a recap for people who may or may not be, you know, more aware of this wonderful world of ED&I, this is a quick reminder of some of the protected characteristics. So these are the ones which are enshrined in law, the 2010 Equality Act. And as you look at those, it might be, you know, that you can easily see that you may fall into several of those characteristics. And that's fairly, you know, and that's fairly usual. So when you have multiple characteristics, then that's what's called intersectionality. And I just think that there's so many terms that are bandied around in this wonderful world that it's just quite nice just to, you know, just to cover those off and just make sure that this is something that, you know, people are aware of. And I guess, you know, where all those protected characteristics start meeting each other and start overlapping, that's where people might start finding themselves having more barriers to access, you know, services, or less access to opportunities. So this is something to kind of like bear in mind. I was on a call last week, so I sit on a few different EDI committees of, you know, whether it's CDTs or multi-million-pound kind of like hubs and you know, very well-funded activities. We had the conversation that actually perhaps the Equality Act is starting to look a bit out of date and out of step, and is there a refresh needed? And actually universities like Nottingham University have actually gone beyond the Equality Act now, and other universities might do the same. So in addition to those, for example, you might have caring responsibilities, because there's a recognition that things like maternity leave actually, whereas, you know, that's obviously looking at the female perspective, but actually, you know, what about paternity leave? What about caring? You know, and always, obviously, you know, older generation caring for older relatives, you know, people with disabilities. So caring responsibilities is another one that crops up quite a lot. One that we're having more and more discussion about is actually people's socio-economic backgrounds. And again, we had a really good conversation about that last night. You know, and particularly perhaps people who are entering university for the first time. They're the first people to enter higher education, perhaps because of their socio-economic background in the past. Also, we're talking more and more about neurodiversity and making sure that perhaps that isn't in the same context as disability. It's a learning difference, it's not a learning disability. So celebrating neurodiversity, celebrating the way that people think about things differently, and that's a real benefit to the way that we consider our work. Also things like temporary impairment as well, doing a lot of work about things like menopause as well, and really bringing some of those issues to the fore. You know, it only affects 50% of women. However, did you know that GPs aren't trained in menopause? It's not part of their standard training. Anyway, there you go, moving on. So yeah, so there's a lot of things that need to still be done, you know, and perhaps, you know, the Equality Act is obviously incredibly important, but it's great to see that universities are actually moving beyond the protected characteristics. So, I suppose at this point it would be great to think about what you think you can do to practically support diversity and inclusion in your role. And I guess I'd like to kind of open that up to you to share some thoughts and feelings, you know, about, on that basis of that introduction, what issues would you like to address, and how do you think you could possibly support diversity and inclusion in your role, in your team? What sort of steps do you think you might want to make? But if I can put something out there, and I don't want to put, I'm happy to be, challenged on this, but perhaps one of the thoughts that I get back, and one that so in my day job, I've supported 2 multi-million-pound EPSRC research projects. And one of the things that I've really tried to implement in those projects is making sure about equality of voice. So we have some very esteemed professors who are working on this research, and obviously, there's the PI, there's the investigators. But really importantly, it's the researchers who are doing the work. So one of the things that I've really tried to implement is that equality of voice, that it doesn't matter whether you've got 10 years experience, 20 years experience, 6 months experience, your ideas come to the table on an equal footing and everyone should be heard and listened to. And I just don't know whether that's an experience that resonates, here. But sometimes in my role, I've had to act as a little bit of the translator and a little bit of, go on, you can say that, it's okay. And perhaps doing some frantic messages on Teams while we're in a meeting to kind of, give those ECRs on the project, to say, yeah, you can say that, it's absolutely fine. Your voice can be heard as well. So that equality of voice, is that something that resonates in any of your teams? So I suppose just to bring it back to, practically what you can do, and I'm a great believer in you can only change what you can change, and what you can't change, you can't. So think about what's in your sphere of influence, think about what you can do. And I guess over the past 2.5 years, the one thing that I've been able to do and what's been in my sphere of influence is the Connected Everything network that I manage. Now, I will do full disclosure at this point. The principal investigator of Connected Everything is Professor Sarah Sharples. So at the point of when I was appointed network manager, she was Pro-Vice-Chancellor for ED&I at Nottingham University. So therefore, this wasn't a particularly difficult conversation. So I will have full disclosure on that. However, what she did do is let me have complete reign over what ED&I would look like for Connected Everything. She was absolutely clear ED&I would be embedding Connected Everything. We would be vocal about ED&I and Connected Everything, but the way that happened, she basically left to me. Now, I must admit, kind of walking into a job and 6 weeks later we're in COVID, there was a few things going off, and so it did take me over 6 months to come up with an ED&I plan for Connected Everything. But part of that was about taking time, getting to know the network, getting to know our members, getting to know our advisory board, obviously the investigators, on understanding what it was. And I guess the key thing that I still felt, and I still think it's important now, is kind of giving yourself that mandate to do ED&I, whatever that, or whatever words you want to use. Basically, and kind of giving myself a little bit of a business case, because I knew there were clear things that I wanted to do with our network, which I hoped would make a difference. But I was going to have to ask people to possibly change the way that they would change the way that they were used to doing things. So I kind of came up with our ED&I principle, and I said that this is everything that Connected Everything was going to live by for the next 2 years. Now, this isn't particularly revolutionary, but it's just like basically saying if we have D&I included in our research, then we're going to have happy and healthy research teams. And given the fact that £600,000 of the Connected Everything money, it always goes directly to feasibility study teams, led by early career researchers often. So it's a £60,000 feasibility study funding pot that they can apply for. And often it's very first-time PIs who are doing this. This is the first time they've been awarded some EPSRC money. And I really wanted to know that if they were going to apply for this money, I'd got their back. They were going to get supported. They weren't just going to get the computer says no. They weren't going to get only email communication. I wanted to make sure. But in return for all of that, I wanted their data. So I've been collecting data. So over 2.5 years of Connected Everything, I've just got shy of 300 data points now of all the people that have been funded through the Connected Everything activities. And through that, we're just in the stages of building together a paper now to say this is how you can build diversity and inclusion. So we wanted to fund 10 feasibility studies. We only ended up funding 9 because of the quality threshold that we were going to meet. But 5 out of those 9 feasibility studies were led by female PIs, which was really important to us. We also got diversity inclusion in terms of ethnic backgrounds and also disability included. And that was about us being really, really, really vocal about who we wanted to fund, how we wanted to fund them, and the support that they were going to get. So hopefully we've lived by our principle and taken that through to everything that Connected Everything does. We also, as Sammy mentioned at the beginning, we've also kind of like extended this beyond Connected Everything. And one of the things that Connected Everything does is we convene a network of networks, which is 28 hubs and other networks, largely funded by EPSRC, where we've taken that a step further and really tried to think about ED&I and how that broad network community actually feels about what we're doing. So Sammy and I did, and Sammy did a huge amount of data analysis from a network survey that we put out last year. This is a ask that perhaps at the end of this conference, please feel free to fill in the 2022. Last year we created a benchmark to understand how we are doing. We've seen some spots where we can certainly do better. We've tried to continue improving this past year, so we really want to know, are we moving the dial or not? Are we making a difference? And the only way we can do that is by asking people. So it is a 10-minute survey, isn't it? It really is just 10 minutes. So if you could do that, that would be amazing. So just to move on to the EPSRC expectations that I worked on. So this was a piece of work that had been kicked off by EPSRC probably well over 2 years ago. But if anyone has any dealings directly with EPSRC, you'll know that they're really, really under capacity. But they were determined to finish this piece of work, which came out of one of their strategic advisory groups. And they really wanted to get this piece of work kind of completed. So me and my colleague, Emma Hadfield-Hudson, were seconded from Nottingham University to actually get this piece of work across the finish line. So when we started it, there were actually only 4 themes that had been articulated in the ED&I expectations. And during the course of the 5 months secondment, Emma and I realised that we really felt that there were a few areas missing. So the first area that we really felt that needed to be explored in these expectations was developing an approach to embedding ED&I in the research life cycle. And that was really asking people to take the time out just to start thinking about this, because ED&I doesn't happen on its own. It actually does need a bit of planning and a bit of thought. You need to think about it right from the beginning. So the first thing was just take some time to plan this in. And if you're doing that, then actually good things will follow from that. The other theme that we strongly thought was missing was 6. There wasn't a word about the research itself. We thought that was a bit of a problem, that, it's great if if the environment of the research is inclusive, but if the actual research outputs aren't very inclusive, then that means they're going to stay in a very small, niche area. And obviously, one of the things about research is it is meant to change the world for the better, but if the world can't access it, then that's a bit of a problem. So we did quite a lot of work on that in terms of in terms of exploring things, and it turns out that Canada is actually pretty ahead of the curve on this one. So there's some really, really good practice in Canada. So once we kind of settled on the themes, and during the course of the secondment, Emma and I spoke to, I think, 30 different institutions up and down the country. We had multiple conversations with ED&I champions up and down the country as well, because EPSRC were absolutely clear that this wasn't going to be something done to the community. It wanted to be done something with people. So we wanted to make sure that we really, really spoke to as many people as we could to make sure that the expectations were sensible and were something that would be useful. So as a result of that, we then, once we kind of got the areas pinned down, then just thinking about area 3, ensuring diversity and inclusion in all activities such as events, sandpits and networking. We then went out and spent absolutely ages researching the best examples we could find. Now, out of all the conversations that we had up and down the country, obviously all via Zoom, because this was in lockdowns and everything else, then we were given access to some really, really great examples. But we wanted this expectation guide to be something where people could pick it up, have a look at some examples and think, you know what, perhaps I don't quite fancy what Imperial College London is doing, but what I want to do is this. So making sure that no one had a blank piece of paper to start from. And we're not saying that this is the way that, this isn't dictatorial, you have to do it this way, but it's giving people those really practical ideas of how, how they can just go about their EDI, so no one's starting from a blank piece of paper. So we gave lots and lots of examples. So the actual, so I don't know whether you can see that or not, but that is actually the one-page guide on EDI expectations. But sat behind those 6 themes on one page, we were very keen to keep it to one page. We were told by the people that we spoke to, one page from EPSRC was pretty much miraculous, rather than having, burning several thousand trees. But behind that sits the 7 pages of all the examples with the links. So that was something that we thought made this a lot more practical and hopefully brought it to life. So there's lots and lots of examples in there. So again, I really, recommend that if you have a chance to have a look at that and make it, and see, what from that you might be able to take back into your research teams. So in terms of developing your inclusive approach, absolutely, I think I may have said it 3 times already, but think about making time for EDI. That is the most important step. If you're not thinking about it, you're not going to do it. So really start taking the moment. And again, I completely hear what voices have already said in the room this morning about it's not ticking an EDI box. It's about making action. It's not about box ticking. It's about changing the way that we do stuff. And I'm a massive believer in lots and lots of small changes, a bit like climate change and all the rest of it, but lots of small changes will turn into big actions and big results. We can all do just a little bit something. It's not about leaving it to someone else. It's about thinking about what we do and taking that responsibility. And also the emphasis is about supporting everyone, supporting every person in the room, not just, putting people into, kind of protected characteristics, pigeonholes, as we've already discussed. Obviously, people will have perhaps multiple barriers, people might have fewer barriers, but it's just thinking about what people need. People might have bad days, people might have good days, but just thinking about, people and what they need, not just thinking about protected characteristics. One of the things that we do need to be careful about is also not making generalisations. I've been in a few meetings where perhaps I've been the only woman in a room, and therefore my mandate has been to represent womankind. The only person I can represent is me. The only experience I have is mine. And it does feel pretty awkward to be the one in the room saying, so Deborah, what do you think about that? And all of a sudden you feel like you've got this burden, and I can see some nods here. So please be mindful of people in the room because of their, and also it really goes on about hidden disabilities as well. Obviously, it's relatively obvious I'm a woman, perhaps. It's relatively obvious if you've got a different skin tone, but also there will be there'll be hidden disabilities in the room. There'll be lots of things going off. So just really be mindful about not picking on the same person all the time to do the same things. So one of the examples that we've got with Connected Everything is that for particularly on online conferences, it was a gift in many respects that while we may have wanted some keynote speakers, for our conference, what we said is, please, can you bring along one of your early career researchers or, someone from your team who will be able to co-deliver with you. And because everything was done online, it was no more expense, no more time, but we were making sure that that platform opportunity was given to a much more diverse range of people. And yes, okay, we might want to hear what the professor says, but also we really want to hear, those other voices in the room as well. So we were able to expand that a lot more. So that was a joy of, the online opportunity, that you weren't asking any more people to travel, you were just asking more people to share the platform. And again, involve people, don't do this to them, do it with them. And I think also people might be aware of allyship and being an ally, and that's, being that voice in the room where you can see that perhaps people aren't being given the opportunity to talk, so you can be the person that just stops the meeting and just says, right, can I just double check that everyone has had that opportunity to speak? You're not necessarily picking on an individual, but you're just making sure that people have had that opportunity. Or if you know that, I'm an extrovert, so it's quite easy for me to talk, but, for introverts, perhaps they want to send an email, make sure that that variety of ways for people to contribute is offered, so their voice can still get included. So, if we can have perhaps from one table, one piece of advice you would give to someone who comes up to you and just says, I'd really like to do something in this area, but I don't know what. So basically, we're saying, give it a go. We appreciate that we might not always get it right, but make the effort to give it a go. And anyone's diversity and inclusion journey is going to include mistakes, and we just have to admit that we are going to make it wrong. But if you do get it wrong, admit it. Don't try and cover it up. Just say, hold your hands up and say, we got it wrong, and that's okay, and we will learn from that as a result. Really key things that I think is important is if you're not sure how to pronounce someone's name, just ask them. Don't try and get it wrong. Just ask, and that's okay. I've got quite a straightforward name, but I do get upset when people spell it Deborah. No, I'm Debra as in zebra, and that is what I am. And people know that I never get called Deborah. That's something important, and what I may have been told a lot when I was a child. But anyway, and if you spot that something hasn't worked, make that kind connection. You don't necessarily need to do it in the big forum, but perhaps go up to the person and just say, have you considered doing it this way? Be that sort of ally to that person, be a little bit of a coach, and just be brave, because perhaps that person just genuinely didn't think about the way that came out. I think those kind connections are the way that we can hopefully make progress. Again, think about your own role, think about what you can do as an ally, about the way that you might chair meetings, support colleagues, and really spotting out microaggressions. That's something that is so important. Think about some resources. I have a top tip for resource, and then exactly as what was said in the first, in the first table, was finding those safe environments and creating those safe environments to ask questions. So if there's only one book, one resource that you need to read, I'm not on commission, I absolutely promise you, but this is a brilliant, brilliant book, Invisible Women by Caroline Corrado Perez. Really fantastic, really accessible. I am not a data person myself. I love a good Excel spreadsheet as much as the next person, but this is a brilliant book, and it talks a huge amount about movies and talks about that only 3% of Hollywood leads are women. For some of those, frustrations, Caroline has summarised them and put them in this book, but also explains how drug development still necessarily is based on a male stereotype. It does go beyond, it does talk about, race inequalities as well. Obviously, the main focus is gender. And if you really love the book, Caroline does a weekly blog as well, and she's just recently launched a podcast. So you can embrace yourself in this world if you so choose to. But if there is one book that you fancy taking away, I would, or one resource I would say put a bit of time into, I would say it was that one. So, code of conduct. This is where we would really like you to think about developing this. Have we still got about half an hour left? Okay, that's good. On your tables, and if any tables are feeling particularly weary, if you want to, move to a bigger table so there's more brain space, to generate this, it would be really good to think about a code of conduct. I have spent quite a lot of time developing code of conducts for Connected Everything, and I made it really clear, and again, in terms of the way that I've run events for Connected Everything, I've made it really clear that this is the code of conduct. And as a result of having a very clear code of conduct, there was, it was an online event where one member of that online event, their behaviour was inappropriate. We were able to discuss the code of conduct, and we agreed by mutual agreement that they would be leaving the event. And it was done amicably, it was done well, it was done in a way that they came back to Connected Everything and they've attended future events. So I was really pleased that their behaviour at that particular event, I felt, wasn't the behaviour and it wasn't the standard that we clearly set, and we were able to discuss it in a really positive way. So I've seen how a very difficult situation, particularly because it was online, could have kind of escalated, it could have got big, it could have been an issue. But actually, through having a really good code of conduct, we had a framework in which to have that discussion. And it was able to, make sure that experience for the other, 30-odd people who were online, they had a really good experience that wasn't spoiled by one individual whose behaviour wasn't as we'd all agreed it should be. And so it is about making that great experience for everyone. So again, do you think we've got probably about 10 minutes, do you think?
We can be a
little bit flexible. So I just wondered, just basically, I think you've got paper and pens on your table, but this is just a little bit of a thing about what would be a code of conduct consideration, how can this happen practically, and then just a thought on who would be responsible on making that happen. And perhaps if we have about 10, 15 minutes on your tables to think that out. So just from the experience that I've had on the code of conducts that I've done, a lot of the thoughts that you've come out with, one of the things that was far more used and appreciated than what I ever imagined at the Connected Everything conference that we had in Liverpool back in May was that I designated a quiet space. And this was particularly, basically, this was the first event I'd gone back into the real world with post-COVID. I wasn't sure how some delegates might feel. Perhaps they could, some delegates may have been feeling a little bit overwhelmed, being back in a room full of lots of people. So I really wanted to provide a space where people could just disappear if they just needed to, if they just needed a moment. Also, people, on the neurodiverse spectrum, they may have just needed a place just to chill out, and if that means, going to, mess around on their laptop for a while or do whatever they need to do, that's totally fine. I was worried about having it that people would say, brilliant, I've got a room to go and do that online meeting, which I'm squeezing into while in a conference. I must admit that did happen, but it only happened at the end of the day. So when we wrapped up the conference, people have said, oh, I've got a 5 o'clock or, whatever meeting. Can I go and use the room to do that? And I was like, well, yeah, it's the end of the conference now. That's fine. And people have got hotel rooms to disappear back to if they need it. But a couple of delegates came up to me at the end and just went, we really appreciated having that designated quiet space that was really well signposted, that they didn't need to ask any permission for. They could just disappear if they wanted to. So Sammy and I did have a conversation, alcohol, no alcohol, some alcohol. I think that is going to be a debate which can rage and continue. I must say, I think within 5 years' time, EPSRC won't be funding alcohol at events. I think that's the way it's going. That's my view. We'll wait and see what happens. And range of people, how people can contribute. Again, it's great having this on Zoom. People can put in the chat if they don't want to raise their hands, but having that variety of options. Mix of options as well between workshops, presentations and networking, and also giving permission for people to move. I've got a fairly rubbish back. I do struggle to sit in the same place for a long time. It's really good for me to move. So again, in the code of conduct, I give permission. If people just want to have a quick walk round at the back, because that's good for for me, it's good for my back and all the rest of it, then give permission for people to move. We don't have to be glued to the same seat for hours on end. And then exactly, ED&I champions or a named person for people to go to if they've got concerns. My name was plastered about when I wasn't chairing the conference, but I did a stand up and a big wave to everyone. If anyone's got any concerns at all, this is Deborah, go and talk to her. And I just made it really super obvious that, I was that named person. And then also just a clear description of the consequences of inappropriate behaviour, which, so basically, again, in our code of conduct, we've made it clear that if people don't apply by this code of conduct, then they probably won't be, the worst thing that will happen is that they won't be invited. They'll be encouraged to leave the event, but also, they won't be invited to future Connected Everything events. Thankfully, we've never needed to go there. That's good. And also, I guess it was the good point you made about data. Equally filming and photo opt-outs. There could be really good reasons why people don't want their photo plastered all over the internet or on recordings. Really, domestic abuse, all, really good reasons why people don't need that. So always give people the option, because people really might not want anything to do with social media at all. For very, very valid reasons. So yeah, so that's my bit really. I think we've had lots of questions, but thank you so much for all your participation.